All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Picture this. It's 1945. A completely devastating world war has just wrapped up. Cities are in ruins, and honestly, the entire globe is just exhausted. But out of the ashes of that conflict, two absolute superpowers emerged stronger than ever, the United States and the Soviet Union. Now, these two, they did not trust each other one bit. They were constantly watching each other's every move. But instead of clashing on a traditional battlefield with armies and tanks, they decided to battle it out using rockets and science. They were racing to touch something no human being had ever reached before. Scientists in both of these nations started looking up at the night sky, asking themselves a really audacious question. What if we could actually go there? What if a human being could literally leave the Earth? Now, this wasn't just some casual daydream. It was a dangerous, astronomically expensive, and borderline impossible idea. But here's the thing. Neither the US nor the USSR was willing to lose face. The spark was ignited, and they needed some seriously brilliant minds to lead the charge. So at the very heart of this massive rivalry were two quiet genius engineers pulling the strings. On one side, you have Wernher von Braun in the US. He was a young engineer who had built rockets for the German army during the war, and he was brought over to America, given a lab, a team, and basically told, build us bigger, better rockets. On the flip side, running the Soviet program in absolute, total secrecy was Sergei Korolev. He was this incredibly serious, quiet guy who had literally survived being imprisoned by his own government, but he never let go of his dream of space. These two guys never met, they never even spoke to each other, but every single rocket one built was a direct countermove to the other. And wow, did this quiet chess match escalate quickly into an unbelievable sprint by the Soviet Union. In October 1957, they pull off a massive win and launch Sputnik. Just a month later, 1 month, they launched Laika, a sweet little straight dog from Moscow, making her the very first living creature to orbit the Earth. Now, tragically, the tech just wasn't there yet to bring her home safely, but the real jaw-dropper came in April 1961. A super calm young pilot named Yuri Gagarin climbs into his Vostok 1 spacecraft and flies around the entire planet in just 108 minutes, the very first human being in space. Let's rewind for a second to that first Sputnik launch in 1957, because it was a massive, terrifying wake-up call for America. The crazy part? Sputnik itself wasn't huge. It was just a metal sphere roughly the size of a beach ball. But as it zipped around our planet every 96 minutes, it broadcast this simple, steady radio signal. Anyone with a radio could tune in and hear it. Beep, beep, beep. While the Soviets were celebrating this huge triumph, Americans were looking up at the sky feeling this entirely new, really uncomfortable emotion, sheer fear. People were thinking, okay, if the Soviets can drop a metal ball into orbit, what's stopping them from putting a weapon up there? So naturally, America was incredibly embarrassed about being beaten to the punch. To counter this, the US government moved at lightning speed. They opened the checkbook, poured massive amounts of funding into catching up, and created a brand new organization from scratch, NASA. Their mission from day one was simple, urgent, and intense: beat the Soviets. But honestly, those early days were pretty rough. American rockets were literally exploding on the launch pad, and missions were facing huge delays, all while the Soviets just kept charging ahead. To turn the tide, President John F. Kennedy steps up and makes a declaration that was just pure audacity. In May 1961, mere weeks after Yuri Gagarin's historic flight, Kennedy stands in front of Congress and makes this wild, seemingly impossible promise. He says America is going to put a man on the moon before the end of the decade. As he famously put it, America would do this not because it was easy, but because it was hard. I mean, imagine the silence in that room. NASA is struggling just to get basic space flights off the ground, and Kennedy is quite literally promising the moon. But you know what? That bold, almost crazy promise was exactly what NASA needed. It gave them a crystal clear, unwavering focus. It sparked this massive operational shift, where suddenly the entire country had a unified purpose. Step 1, they started recruiting the bravest test pilots they could find. Step 2, they shifted focus to building absolutely massive new rockets. And step 3, thousands of scientists and engineers came together under one unified banner: Program Apollo. The work kicked off immediately, but as we're about to see, this journey was anything but easy. The path to the moon was incredibly perilous, and the cost was truly heartbreaking. On January 27, 1967, during what was supposed to be just a routine ground test, a fire suddenly sparked inside the Apollo 1 capsule. It spread in an instant, and 3 American astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, tragically lost their lives. The nation was completely devastated. The entire Apollo program was grounded for nearly 2 years. People were genuinely looking at this and asking, is the price of the moon just too high? And it wasn't just the Americans suffering these devastating losses. Just a few months later, in April 1967, the Soviet Union faced its own horrific sacrifice. Cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov died when his spacecraft, Soyuz 1, crashed violently upon re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Both of these superpowers were pushing the absolute limits of human capability, and both were paying the ultimate tragic price in this race to the stars. But quietly, right behind the scenes, the entire balance of the space race was permanently shifting. Back in January 1966, the brilliant Soviet engineer we talked about, Sergei Korolev, tragically passed away during a routine medical operation. And without his visionary leadership, the Soviet moon program just lost its compass. It started slowing down, it lost focus, and making critical decisions suddenly became incredibly difficult. So while America was slowly rebuilding and pushing forward with this renewed, fierce energy after their own tragedy, the Soviets unfortunately began to fall behind. Fast forward to December 1968, and America is ready to push the boundaries further than ever before. Apollo 8 didn't actually land on the moon, but it flew all the way out there and orbited around its quiet, gray surface. And while they were orbiting, astronaut William Anders looked out his window and snapped a photograph that literally changed human perspective forever. He called it Earthrise. It showed our beautiful, fragile blue planet just floating all alone in the vast blackness of space. It gave the entire world this profound sense of wonder, of how small we really are, and of our absolute connection to one another. Now the momentum is really building toward the ultimate climax. To wrap your head around the sheer scale of what went down next in July 1969 with Apollo 11, I want you to think about the number 30. When Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were strapped inside their spacecraft waiting for zero on that countdown clock, the rocket sitting underneath them was taller than a 30-story building. With a roar louder than a thunderstorm, it lifted off the launch pad, officially kicking off the final chapter of the race. 4 agonizingly long days later, on July 20th, the descent to the lunar surface begins. Michael Collins stays up in orbit while Armstrong and Aldrin head down in a tiny landing module called the Eagle. And guys, it was insanely tense. They're coming down over a surface covered in deep dust and huge boulders. Alarms are literally blaring in the cabin, and their fuel is running dangerously, dangerously low. But then, very gently, they touch down. Armstrong looks out his tiny window and radios back those legendary words. The Eagle has landed. The relief in Mission Control in Houston was palpable. People were literally in tears. A few hours later, the hatch of the Eagle finally pops open, and the world is watching in absolute breathless awe. And when I say the world, I mean it. 600 million people were glued to their blurry television sets and radios. To put that in perspective, at the time, that was the single largest audience in human history, all holding their collective breath to see what would happen the moment he stepped outside. As Armstrong slowly climbs down that ladder and his boot finally makes contact with the powdery gray dust of the moon, he says it so clearly. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It was this moment of supreme, unbelievable triumph. They had actually done it. They answered that wildly dangerous, impossible question that scientists had first asked way back in 1945. Shortly after, Buzz Aldrin climbs down to join him. Together, they walk on the lunar surface. They collect rock samples. And yes, they plant the American flag. But they also left something incredibly beautiful behind. A small metal plaque with a very simple, profound message. We came in peace for all mankind. It was a powerful reminder that even though the United States had technically won the race, this victory didn't just belong to one country. It belonged to all of humanity. They were standing up there as representatives of our entire planet. After that monumental landing, the two superpowers actually started taking very different paths. The U.S. kept sending astronauts back, with a total of 12 human beings walking on the moon between 1969 and 1972. The Soviet Union, feeling the loss of Korolev, never ended up sending a cosmonaut to the lunar surface. But instead of giving up, they pivoted. They focused their brilliant engineering minds on pioneering space stations, making huge, foundational discoveries about how humans can actually survive and live long-term in the zero-gravity environment of space. And over the years, something truly amazing happened. That fierce, fear-driven competition we saw at the beginning, it started to thaw. Fast forward to 1975, and an American Apollo spacecraft and a Soviet Soyuz spacecraft literally dock together in orbit. We get this iconic, literal handshake in space. Two former bitter rivals coming together for the sake of science and exploration. It perfectly laid the groundwork for the International Space Station, where astronauts from all over the world live and work side by side today. So, looking back at all the history we've unpacked in this explainer, the takeaways are just huge. First, it absolutely proves that when human beings lock on to a shared dream, we can achieve the literal impossible. Second, it shows us that science, curiosity, and exploration will always take us so much further than weapons and fear ever could. And finally, when you look down at our fragile blue world from the quiet darkness of space, it's obvious. Earth has no borders. It is incredibly precious, and we have to protect it together. The source material leaves us with this really fantastic metaphor, and I love this. Your journey is a rocket launch. Think about it. Just like those astronauts who trained for years, pushing through massive setbacks and heartbreaking tragedies long before they ever touched the moon, your journey is the same. Every new concept you wrap your head around, every single obstacle you manage to overcome, it's all just another small step propelling you forward. So as we wrap up this explainer and look back on those quiet, brilliant engineers, the incredibly brave test pilots, and the impossible promises that fueled the space race, I want you to turn that focus inward. Think about your own impossible goals. What is the moon you are trying to reach right now? And more importantly, what is your next small step going to be?